So today I want to talk about differentiating inverse trig functions, which is the last class of functions that you need to know. And after this, you pretty much learned how to differentiate anything and everything. You know all the rules. You know most classes of functions. You know polynomials, exponentials, logarithms, inverse trig, regular trig. You'll know everything. So now all you need to do after this is to apply them, and that's going to be the next unit. So inverse trig functions. So what is an inverse trig function? So you usually denote them by sign with a -1 power, or you use arc in front. So arc sine of x. I'm going to pronounce it as arc sine of x, but I'm going to write it with the -1 power thing. So obviously, inverse sine x and sine x are inverses, right? So sine -1x, arc sine x, and sine x are inverses. So what does that tell you? Well, a bell should be ringing in your head that we can use this g prime of x equals 1 over f prime of g of x formula that we used last video to, instead of prove ln of x, and to help us we used e of x, e to the x. In this video we're going to use sine of x to help us figure out what arc sine of x is. So so if f of x equals sine of x and g of x equals arc sine x, then arc sine of x prime, the derivative of arc sine x, is going to be equal to 1 over what's f prime of x? It's cosine x, right? So cosine, but instead of cosine, we're going to write g of x, which is arc sine x. And what is arc sine x? So if we have y equals arc sine x, what does that tell you? It tells you that x is equal to sine of y, right? We only need this for now, but we're going to need this too later. So arc sine x is equal to y, so we can substitute that. So 1 over cosine y. And what is cosine y? Well, the Pythagorean identity tells us that sine squared of anything plus cosine squared of anything is equal to 1. So if we solve for cosine y, we get the square root of 1 over sine squared of y. When we substitute that, we get 1 over the square root of 1 minus sine squared of y. And we're almost done. We just need to replace sine squared of y because we want it in terms of x. Well, it's right here. Sine of y equals x. So this is the same thing as 1 over the square root of 1 minus x squared. And we're done. We just proved that the derivative of arc sine x is positive 1 over the square root of 1 minus x squared. Now, we can do the same thing for cosine. So arc cosine of x. So the derivative of arc cosine is going to be equal to 1 over, so f of x here is going to be cosine x, and g of x is going to be arc cos. So what's f prime of x? It's negative sine, right? So it's negative sine of arc cos x. And so what is arc cos x? Well, that's going to be y, right? So if y equals, if we let y equal arc cos x, x is going to be cos cosine of y. So this is going to be equal to 1 over negative sine of y. And what is sine of y? Well, sine squared y plus cosine squared y equals 1. So sine of y is equal to the square root of 1 minus cosine squared y. So that becomes 1 over negative square root of 1 minus cosine squared y. But what is cosine of y? Well, that's just x. So this becomes, and this is going to be our final trig function, derivative, negative 1 over the square root of 1 minus x squared. And that is our derivative. Notice how it's very similar to the derivative of inverse sine. That was positive 1 over the square root of 1 minus x squared, and cosine is the same thing, but just with a negative. So this is a mega review. So the derivative of sine of x is equal to cosine of x. Simple. Derivative of cosine x is obviously negative sine of x. We derived tan of x to be secant squared of x. What's the derivative of secant? Well, I haven't explicitly done it, but you should still know. That's secant x times tan of x. The derivative of cosecant of x is negative cosecant x cotangent of x. Speaking of cotangent, the derivative of cotangent of x is going to be equal to negative cosecant squared x. So those are your derivatives of your traditional trig functions. Now what about inverse trig functions? So the derivative of arc sine is going to be equal to 1 over the square root of 1 minus x squared. Inverse cosine is the same thing, but negative. Inverse tan is going to be positive 1 over 1 plus x squared. Inverse cotangent is going to be negative 1 over 1 plus x squared. The derivative of inverse secant of x is going to be, what is that? 1 over x times x squared minus 1. And inverse cosecant of x, its derivative, is going to be negative 1 over x times x squared minus 1.